Ladles and jelly spoons, welcome back to Badgerworks. Today, wood. Now, you might be thinking, why on earth have you got a big lump of tree on your workbench? Well, I will explain. If you've been following this little series of videos, I've been working towards making a diorama for the first time in many years, and this is going to be the base for said diorama. So what I've got here is a lump of tree that I got from a neighbour. They had some trees cut down, and I basically secured some of the offcuts. Now this is a fairly hefty chunk of wood, as you can see, but I think it's going to do a couple of things for us. First, it's going to look very striking as a base, but more importantly, I'm going to be putting some electronics in the base, so this, once it's hollowed out, will give us plenty of space to put stuff inside. The one slight thing with this is they caught it with the chainsaw, but that, that's not a problem. We're going to put some switches on the back, and that will be the back anyway. So it will go this way up. It will have the model on it here, and it's going to have various effects added, which will become apparent in future videos. So what I'm going to do first is turn it upside down, and I've got some of the components that I'm going to use, and I'm just going to lay them out roughly so that I can mark how much material I need to remove in order to get everything inside it. So basically what I've got here is a battery holder, a box, which will become apparent in a future video, and a charging circuit. The charging circuit will be to charge the battery so that we don't have to keep taking the battery out to charge it. So that's roughly where I need everything to be. So I know I've got plenty of space for everything to go on here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a pencil, and I'm just going to roughly mark out where all these things are, and then we'll take it over to the drill press and we'll start removing some material. I want to make as much room in here as I can without weakening the wood. So that should do us. I'll just tidy that up a little bit, and then but that way I know if I remove this much, I've got more than enough space. So we'll take this over to the drill press, the pillar drill, and we'll look at removing some material. So off we go. So here we are at the pillar drill press, and we can start thinking about removing some of this material. Now, how are we going to remove this material? Well, we're going to use what's called a Forstner bit. Now, for those of you who don't know, a Forstner bit is it's basically one of these. It's basically a heavy drill bit that's designed to cut flat-bottomed holes. So the way it works is you've got like a cutting edge on each side here, and that scores the material, and then these flat cutters here remove the material, and it leaves a nice flat-bottomed hole, which is perfect for what we're doing, because obviously we don't want to go all the way through, because we still want to have the top of the model, of the base there, so that we can stand the model on it. So this is what we're going to use. Not quite this big, not just yet. Now, what I'm going to do first of all, I need to fit this, focus, there we go. I need to fit a couple of these. Now these are actually model bases, but what I'm going to use them for is blanking plates that I can put the switches and things on. Now I don't really want them just sitting flush on the wood, because they'll look weird. So I'm actually going to recess them slightly. Now I've measured these. This is 30mm in diameter, and I have here a 30mm Forstner bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut in a few millimeters, and then that will give us a nice little recess for the base to sit in, and then we can drill a hole all the way through inside in order to get to the back of it. So I'm going to do that first. So I need to drill on the front and the back first. So I'll set this up and we'll get on with it. So there we have, focus, hello. It's not going to focus. Here we have a nice little recess here, and that will fit quite nicely in there. Yeah. So that will now give us somewhere to attach the plate. So now I'm going to do another one on the back. Drop the ball. And there's the one on the back. Oh, it's focused now. There we go. So again, that will fit in there, and we can give us a nice little place to mount our switches. Now what I'm going to do is switch to a slightly smaller bit, and I'm going to drill deeper in so that we've got room to get to the back of it, so that we can get to the switches and everything when we put them in. There you go. So now we've got that hole there. So when we drill through the back, we should hit the back of that hole, and that will just empty that hole out. And that leaves us a nice little rim for the base to sit on, but it still gives us plenty of room to get to the back to put the switches in. And we'll do the same again on this one. Now when we set up to cut the holes down here, we need to obviously not go all the way through. So we need to set the depth on the drill press so that we don't go all the way through. But we're going to use a variety of different sizes of Forstner bits. Now the nice thing is with these, and this is one of the reasons they do it, all of these bits are exactly the same length, which means that when we set the depth for one, it will be the same for all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the smallest one, which is 15 millimeters. Pop that in. And now I'll raise the bed. Lock it off. And now what we can do is we can set the depth. Now we want to leave probably about at least ½ an inch on the top there. So I'll put that to there, and probably about there. So I can now set the depth stop on the drill, and now when I come down it won't go any lower than that. So there's no chance of me going all the way through, and also it will mean that our holes will all be at the nice same depth. So what I'm going to do with this smaller drill is I'm going to drill out the corners, or anywhere where there's like a corner, and then I'll use progressively bigger bits to remove the rest of it. You can see there I've hit the back side of this hole, so that will clean it up nicely so that we can get to the back of it. Drop the wall. And here it is, largely drilled out. What I'll do now is I'll just clean up the edges with a chisel, and then we've got a nice place to put all our electronics. Right, so I've removed most of the corners with a chisel. What I'm going to do now is I've just put a drum sander in the drill press, and I'll put that inside and just clean up the edges a little bit more. So here's our block hollowed out, and as you can see we've got plenty of space inside for all of our electronics. So now we can start looking at doing the top of it, the actual diorama piece. So the first thing I want to do is just make a base for the top of this with some ready mix filler. So I'll just get some on my finger and just work it in, and I'm just putting this first coat down really just to kind of grip the wood and allow the secondary coats to adhere properly. There we go. Now we'll just leave that until it sets up a little bit, and then we'll put a bit more over the top to kind of start building up where we want our road to be. So now I'm going to just build up a bit more, and I'm going to create like a lump where the edge of the road will be. Blend it in a little bit on the outside. When this dries a little bit more, then what we can do is actually come back and smooth it out a bit more. But for now it's just a question of putting that first base coat down. There we go. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just to create the rough shape of the terrain. That's what we're doing. So now we'll leave this to set up for a bit, and then once it starts to dry we'll come back and smooth it over. Okay, so that's dried up a little bit now. So what I'm going to do is I've just got a little bit of water here. I'm just going to put my finger in it and just gently smooth out the surface. You don't want to smooth it out too much, you just want to kind of take the rough edges off. You can see just by rubbing over it, it's starting to go smooth. Just very, very gentle, very delicate. Try not to sort of press into it, otherwise you'll leave fingerprints and all sorts. It doesn't have to be perfect, of course, because we want it to look like mud, so it's we're not trying to get it sort of glass smooth, just try and take some of the rough edges off. Right, I think that will do. Now we can leave it to dry completely. Just one more thing, before this dries completely, I've got one of the tracks here off the tank, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some track marks in the road. So I'm going to take my track, dip it in some water so hopefully it won't stick, and then lay it on the road like so, and just give it a little dab, and then lift it off. Now I don't know if you can see that, but that's left quite a nice imprint of the track. Now I've got to do the other track now, I've got to get them the right width. Now I've got the trailer off the tank, and that's about the same width, so it's pretty much the entire width of the road. So I'll put one on the other side in about the same place. So again, take my track, dip it in the water. The nice thing about this being a rubber track is it makes this a little bit easier. And then pop it down. Press it in. Don't press too hard, but just give it enough just to give it the impression. And then lift it. And there we go. Now obviously the tracks stop here because that's where the front of the tank will be. Now what I've also got here, and I really don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, it's a piece of 2mm styrene tube, and I've cut it at a bevel, but I've left a flat bit, and the reason for that is I'm going to use it to make horseshoe imprints. So basically just take our, and just just at random, so it looks like horses have been riding up this muddy road. Alright, I think that'll do us. And now we can leave it to dry completely, and once it dries, those details we put in will basically be in there forever. Okay, so this base is dry now, so I'm going to put a quick colour coat on it. Now what I've got here is one of these tester pots you get from DIY places. These are a great way of getting hold of large amounts of cheap paint, especially if you look on, quite often they have like an end of line aisle where they sell stuff that they just want to get rid of. Quite often you can get these things literally for pennies. I've got tons of them where it's where a certain line of paint is going out of fashion or whatever, so they just want to get rid of all of the test pots. So this one is called chocolat. Chocolate, it's brown basically. So I'm going to put a little bit of this with a little bit of water and a little touch of PVA, mix it up in a pot, and then we'll put a coat on this. We might need to put a couple of coats of this on, but we can put it on fairly thick. So this is just an initial coat just to help seal everything and give us something to work off of. Obviously try not to go too thick where we put our detail on, because we don't want to obscure the details. I'm going to hit it from both directions to make sure I've got everything covered. Now while this paint's still wet, I'm also going to sprinkle a bit of sand over it just to give it a bit of texture, and that will basically soak into the paint and stick. Just a little bit on the road, not too much, but more on the sides. And then what we'll do is when this is dry, we'll give it another coat. So what I've done now is I've taken the same brown as before, I've added some black to it, and I've watered it down heavily, and I'm going to use it as a wash over the whole thing. Now you'll notice I'm not brushing it on, I'm just dabbing it on because I don't want to knock the sand off, or avoid knocking the sand off as much as possible. Drop the load. There we go, now we'll just leave that to dry. Okay, so that's nice and dry now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a very, very light dry brush. And I'm going to use this. It's another house paint. Confusingly also called chocolate. but it's a much lighter colour. Now, going back to what I was saying earlier about buying these things cheap, 10p. Anyway, we're going to dry brush some of this onto here, and mainly we want to try and pick up the sand and the gravel. So let's get on with it. Right, now this is where the fun's really going to start. I've broken out the static grass applicator that we made in a previous video. I'm going to use that, and in it I have 2mm meadow green. So I've got a little bit of PVA in here. I've watered it down a little bit, not a lot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it with this cheap nasty brush, and basically what I want to try and do is get it sort of around the sand we put on earlier, but not necessarily over it, just kind of like in patches. So let's see how we get on. Switch it on, and let's see what happens. Yeah, I don't know whether you can see that. It doesn't look too bad actually. So what I'm going to do is I'll do the other side as well. Yeah, I'm very pleased with that. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So I was really happy with the way the grass came out. I'm very, very happy with how it came out. So much so, in fact, that I've actually added some more, as you can see here. What I've done is I've added some, where I put the meadow grass on, I've put some longer meadow grass just around the edges, dotted it around. And I've also put on a few blotches of a moss green, just to add to the effect somewhat. Just to break it up a little bit, and I think that looks really smart. I'm very, very happy with how that's come out. And I'm not just saying that because I made it, but it's more the fact that it's the first time I've used this kind of static grass, and the effect is really nice. So what I'm going to do now is seal it all. So I've got here a little spray bottle with some isopropyl alcohol in it. So I'm just going to mist that over the top. I'll do it over here so I don't get alcohol over it. Like that. And then I've got another little spray bottle here with watered down PVA. So I'll spray this over, and that will basically seal it all and make sure none of the strands come adrift. And there we go. So now we can leave this to dry and then get on with the rest of it. Now, while the base is drying, I'm going to make a few little bits and pieces to go on it, just to give it some interest. And the first thing I'm going to make is a little barricade. So what I've got here are some cocktail sticks. Just get a few of these. And I'm just going to make like a little wooden barricade to go across the road. So I'll just cut these down. Twang. So that will be our log to go across the road, and then these ones I'll cut into shorter pieces and make some cross beams for it to sit on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to glue these together to form a cross, and then the barrier will sit on top of it. So what I'm going to do is get a little bit of super glue and another cocktail stick. Put some super glue on here. that, and take the other stick and put it on like that. There you go. So that's the first one. Now we take one of our crosses, we put some super glue in the gap there, and we take our cross beam and we lay that on there. Like that. And then we take the other one, try not to get super glue everywhere, and we put some super glue in there, like that, and we put it on the other end, like that. And then I'm going to give it a little spray with some accelerant just to make sure this glue is completely dry. If you use super glue a lot, get some accelerant. It's great stuff. It makes the glue set instantly. It's very handy stuff. When you're doing things with bits of wood like this, it doesn't matter because it tends to stick instantly anyway, but it still doesn't hurt just to give it a little spray. So there's our little barricade, and I'll give that a few seconds for the accelerant to dissipate, and then we'll paint it up.
Drop the load. Drop the load.
Okay, so the base is all dry now. Looks pretty good. It's looking a bit dull. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over it with a bit of gloss varnish to basically make this mud look wet. And then once I've done that, I'll dry brush over it with a bit of matte varnish just to knock the shine back a bit. There you go, that's looking a bit shinier. It'll probably take a couple of coats to get it where I want it. I've also just misted a little bit over certain areas over here, just to make it look like wet, like it's been rained on. So I'll let this dry and then I'll probably give it another coat, and then we'll look at knocking it back a bit. So here we are now with a couple of coats of gloss varnish on there, and I think you'll see it actually makes that road look quite nice and gloopy. Yeah. So this base is pretty much done now. What I need to do now is start working on mounting the switches in the blanking plates. So I'm going to do that next, and then start on the wiring on the inside. Okay, so what I've been doing is putting together the electronics package for this diorama. It's a bit of a rat's nest at the moment, as you can see. But there's a reason that it's just while I'm figuring out how everything goes together. Obviously when it goes into the diorama it'll be a lot neater than this. Now what we've got here at the moment is our basic layout. If you watch the previous video on the making the smoke machine, which is here, you'll remember that it was powered by a single 18650 battery. So one of the first things you'll notice is that there are now two batteries here. And I did this for a reason. With only one battery, it was more than enough to power it, but because we had a lower voltage, it was pulling more amps to get the watts that the heater wanted. And everything was getting a bit hot. The switches didn't like, I mean, it was pulling about 12 amps. It wasn't very good. So I decided to use two batteries. So by having the two batteries, it gives us double the voltage. We're now on about 8.5 volts, which means we need far fewer amps to get the same wattage, and the whole system is much happier. I also decided, originally I was going to have a button on the front of the diorama that you would hold to make smoke come out, and I didn't really like that idea. I went off that idea very quickly. So I've decided to automate the whole thing. And to do that, I'm using this. Now, I don't know how well you'll be able to see that. This is called a DigiSpark. And I'll put a link to it in the description below. But it's basically a microcomputer. A USB powered microcomputer. Now, I don't know how well you can see this. Let's... You see here it says Tiny 85. This here is an Tiny 85 processor. That's the brains of the outfit. Now the people who designed this, they basically took the chip, and instead of having to do what you would normally do, put it on a breadboard, connect it to an Arduino, connect that to your PC and so on and so forth, they took the chip, they put it on its own board, and on it, it has a very, very stripped down set of USB instructions. And what that means is that you can take this little gadget with its own little USB port, you can plug this straight into your PC and program it without the need for an Arduino or a breadboard or any of that messing about. You literally just plug this thing in and upload code to it. It uses the same Arduino software, the same code, everything. It doesn't have a massive amount of memory, but it's got more than enough for what we want to do. Now the other thing that's very handy about this particular type of these, there's various different ones of these. This one, it'll run on USB, 5 volts, but you can actually power it on up to 35 volts through these pins here. And the reason that it can do that is this little chap here. Now this is a 7805 voltage regulator. And basically what that does, it takes whatever power is coming in from here and drops it down to 5 volts to power the system. So obviously that's perfect for our needs. So having this allows me to automate the smoke machine. Now obviously this doesn't put out anywhere near enough power for the smoke machine. But what it does allow me to do is run this relay. This is a 5-volt relay. Well, it's a 10 amp relay. So you have 5 volts in to trigger the relay, and then whatever power you put on the outside of it. So what I've got at the moment is the DigiSpark is programmed to send a pulse triggering the relay on a time delay. And then we've got our power in from the batteries, and then the power out goes to the smoke machine. And what that does is, not only does it allow us to automate it, but it also means the relay is protecting the rest of the system from the power draw of the smoke machine. So it doesn't now matter what switches we can use anything we like. And again, I'm still just using this normal little switch, which normally wouldn't be anywhere near man enough to run this smoke machine, but it runs this thing perfectly fine. So if I switch it on and give you a little demonstration, and you'll see and it just pulses power. You can hear the relay triggering, and we get our smoke coming out, and it will keep doing that until I switch it off. See? Good, isn't it? Now, of course, having the automation capabilities of the DigiSpark got me thinking. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice if this diorama, as well as having smoke, what if it had sound as well? So I'm going to clear this out of the way for a minute because I want to show you something. And what I want to show you is this. Now this is a sound card. It's similar to the ones that you get, sometimes you know you can get in greetings cards where you open them up and they play a sound or say a message or whatever. This is very similar to that, just on a slightly bigger scale. And the nice thing about this particular one is it allows you to record your own sounds. I've used one of these before. If you've watched the video of the Titanfall 2 Seer kit, that's got one of these in it. Now the nice thing about this particular one is it will basically, it has onboard storage for the sound, and it will play up to 200 seconds of sounds in up to 5 different files, and then you have these buttons here that activate the different sounds. There's a USB port here, you plug it into your PC, there's a little bit of software you download from the manufacturer, and it lets you drag and drop files onto it, and it will play them when you press the buttons. Now it has batteries on it. I've taken the batteries out because I'm not going to use them, but it does come with 3 button batteries. The thing's completely self-contained, you can use it straight out the box. But it also has here, it has a power input. So I'm going to connect this to our existing circuit and power it off of that, because obviously I don't want these batteries inside, because otherwise I'll have to change them at some point. Now the one issue with this is, again, it runs on, or the operating voltage according to the manufacturer is between 3 and 6 volts. It does have a little diode on it. I don't really want to put 8 volts to it because I don't know if it will blow it, and I don't really, I have got another one, but I don't want to risk blowing this up, quite frankly. So what I'm going to do is, when I connect it up, I'm going to use, he says dropping it, this. Now this is also a voltage regulator. It's a 7805. It's the same as the one that we just saw on the DigiSpark, just a little bit bigger. Now the way, I don't know if any of you are really familiar with voltage regulators, but basically what they do is they'll take a power in and then they'll output a lower voltage. Now the way you can tell what that voltage is from the name. So this is a 7805. The last 2 digits are the output voltage. So if it's 05, it's 5 volts. If it was a 7824, then it would output 24 volts, and so on. Anyway, that's beside the point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this to the power in on here, and then I can put our 8 volts into this, and we'll get 5 volts into the board, and that'll be fine. Now, the way this thing works is, as I say, you've got these bunch of momentary switches, and these pins here are labelled. Oh God, I don't know if you'll be able to see that very well, but you've got P0, P1, P2, P3, P4. The right hand pin of each pair is live. When you press the button, obviously it lets the power go through to the other pin, which then sends a message to the brain box saying, hello, I'm position 0, play my sound. And the brain box goes, okay, and plays it. What I'm hoping to do, and I don't know if this is going to work, so this might end up being a catastrophe. What I'm hoping to do, by connecting this to the same power circuit as the rest of the system, I'm hoping to connect the relevant pins to the DigiSpark. And the idea is there'll be 2 sounds on this, one of the engine starting and one of the engine running. And what I'm hoping to achieve is when you switch the system on, the DigiSpark will send a pulse to the first pin, and that will play the sound of the engine starting, and then it will delay. I'll have to obviously figure out the sound files, but it will delay for a certain amount of time, and then it will send another pulse to the second pin, which will play the sound of the engine running, and then it will loop that sound repeatedly until I switch it off. So if all of this goes according to plan, what should happen is when you turn the system on, the DigiSpark will boot up, it will start firing the relay to the smoke machine, but it will also start playing the sound of the engine starting up and then running. And then it will keep doing that until you switch it off. So what I need to do now is attach the voltage regulator to this and connect this to the rest of the circuit, and then we can see if it works. Okay, so I've attached the voltage regulator here. So now I need to connect these wires to the rest of the circuit, and hopefully it will work. Let's give it a go, see what happens. Okay, so I've connected the power for the board to the same power feed for the DigiSpark. What I'm going to do first of all is just switch it on and make sure it actually still works before I start trying to do anything else with it. Now, this board does come with sample sound files on it, so bear in mind this was made in China. So yeah, anyway, I'll switch it on and we'll press a button and see what happens. Right, that works. Yeah, that works. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is let's take this off for a second. Now I do actually have a spare live wire on here on the DigiSpark. So what I'm going to do is very carefully touch it to the second pin, and hopefully it will play the sound. Let's try it. Okay, so this didn't work the way I'd hoped. When I tried touching a live wire to the pin, nothing happened. It would appear that, I think it might be due to the way it's programmed, it needs to make that circuit to work. So you need to have the live from one pin connected to the second pin to complete the circuit. Because what I've done just to test that is I've taken the 2 wires on one of the switches and I've connected them to the relay, and now when I turn it on, and you can hear every time the relay every time the relay triggers, it starts playing the sound. So what I'm going to have to do is try and find a way to trigger this, either using the DigiSpark, or I don't really want to have to use another relay because there's not that much space inside, and to do what I want to do I'd end up needing 3 relays, and I don't really want to do that. So I'll have to have a little think about it and see what I can figure out. So what I'm working on at the moment is this. This is the charging circuit for the batteries. It's very similar to ones you've seen me use previously, with one noticeable difference. This one is not 5 volt in, 5 volt out. If I show you the back of it, will you be able to see that? It says input 5 volt, 1 amp, 2 amp, and then for some reason it's printed backwards, but the output is 8.4 volts, 500 milliamps. So this will charge 2 18650s at once, which is fine because obviously that's what we're doing. So I'm just making the back plate for it to go in. I've already cut a number of holes in it, as you can see. So basically what we've got is the slot in the middle for the charger. Then there's a 5mm hole down here, which is for an LED, which will basically just show when it's on and off, and also a hole at the top here for the switch. Now, this is not my first choice for switch, but it's a case of, as you can see, I've got a very, very small amount of space to work with, and this switch fits. So that's that. Let's just pull it off there for a minute. Now what you'll also see on there, and I don't know if I'll be able to see that very well, down here there are 2 tiny little holes, and they are for fibre optics. And basically on the charging board we've got 2 little status lights here that show charging and fully charged. Now obviously this will be inside the diorama, so they're no good in there. So I'm going to use a bit of fibre optic cable to bring that light to the back panel. So to fit them, I'm going to usually I use hot glue, but these are quite small and quite close together. So I'm going to use a bit of super glue and see how that works.
Drop the load.
Another little accelerant. There we go. And there's the charging board attached. I'm going to put a bit of hot glue on it to secure it, but I've put the fibre optics in there, and I don't know if I'm going to show you this or not. If I connect the USB cable, you can see that the light is transferred to the front there, and when it's charging the red light will be on. Okay, so this is all the wiring done. I know it looks like a complete rat's nest, and it is, but this is just so I could put everything together and make sure everything worked. So we've got our 2 18650 batteries, we've got our rear control panel with the power switch, which isn't connected yet, the USB charger, the power light that shows you when it's on, and also the charging lights. We've got our sound card running through the 5 volt relay. I've changed the speaker for a smaller one. This is a 20mm, and I've made a grill to go in the front, which is here. We've got 2 relays, one controlling one of the sounds and the other one controlling the smoke machine. We've got the smoke machine itself, and we've got the DigiSpark, which is basically controlling everything. So if I turn it on, you can see what it's supposed to do. Right, ready? Contact. You probably can't see the smoke very well because of the white background, but so there you go. Now all I've got to do is fit all of this into the diorama. So here we go. So here's a quick recap of all the components. We've got the power recharge circuit over here. We've got 2 relays to control the smoke and the sound. We've got the smoke machine, obviously. We've got 2 18650 batteries. We've got the sound card, and we've got the DigiSpark. And now I've got to get all of that in there. I suppose I better get on with it.